Ancient empires separated by impassable mountains and seas told nearly identical stories. Long before the Silk Road, myths were the original internet, a network of shared narratives connecting distant cultures. These common legends were not mere coincidence. They were sophisticated tools of diplomacy, carefully used to build trust and forge powerful alliances between potential rivals. By the end of this, you will understand how a shared story could be more binding than a signed treaty. We will uncover why a flood narrative appears across the globe and explore how a hero's journey became a universal blueprint for understanding. This exploration reveals how ancient people found common ground in their deepest beliefs. What foundational story does our own society tell itself today? A Babylonian priest reciting the creation epic Enuma Elish would have found his words strangely echoed in the halls of an Egyptian temple. The specifics of the gods might differ, but the core drama was the same, a primordial chaos of water yielding to a spoken word that brought order to the cosmos. These two men, separated by a vast and trackless desert, had never met, yet their most sacred stories were having the same conversation. This was the power of myth, humanity's first universal language. Long before writing, these narratives were the vessels that carried a culture's entire worldview, its moral codes, and its deepest historical memories across countless generations. The scholar Joseph Campbell called this a glimpse into a collective unconscious, a shared mental bedrock from which all our stories ultimately grow. But these myths were far more than just proto-religion. They were the foundational operating systems for entire societies. They explained why the sun rose and the seasons turned, providing a sense of order in a seemingly unpredictable world. They validated the authority of kings who often claimed direct descent from the gods, weaving political power into the very fabric of the cosmos. Most importantly, they answered the fundamental question of identity, defining what it meant to be part of a people and what their unique role was in the grand scheme of existence. This is why the figure of the sun god is so pervasive, from Ra in Egypt to Surya in India and in Tai for the Inca. The sun's daily journey across the sky was a story every human could see and feel, a universal experience demanding a universal explanation. It bound communities together under a common understanding of reality. So we must ask ourselves, in an age of science and reason, what foundational stories does our own modern society tell itself to create that same sense of cohesion and purpose? Once these powerful narrative frameworks were in place, the stage was set for them to begin an incredible journey, crossing mountains and oceans to find kinship in distant lands. In 1872, a museum assistant named George Smith was sorting broken clay tablets from Mesopotamia when he made a discovery that sent a shockwave through the scholarly world. There, written in ancient cuneiform centuries before the Book of Genesis, was a flood story of staggering similarity. A man is chosen by the gods, builds a great boat, and saves the animal world from a divine deluge. Smith was so overwhelmed he reportedly began running around the room in excitement. He had found a direct parallel to the story of Noah, buried deep within the epic of Gilgamesh. This was not an isolated echo. From the Greek legend of Deucalion and Pirha throwing stones to repopulate the earth, to the Hindu texts where the sage Manu is warned by a fish to build a ship, the Great Flood is one of humanity's most persistent and universal stories. The warnings themselves carry a raw, immediate urgency. Listen to the words from the even older Atrahasis epic. Wall, listen to me. Read Wall, pay attention. It is a desperate, intimate plea from a god to a single righteous man, a moment of cosmic drama preserved in clay. So why does this specific cataclysm appear everywhere? One compelling theory points to a shared, real-world trauma. Following the last ice age around 7,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, catastrophically flooding coastal settlements and fertile plains that had been home to humans for millennia. The Persian Gulf, for instance, was likely a fertile river valley before it was inundated by the Indian Ocean. These weren't just local events, they were world-changing. The collective memory of these devastating rises in water, passed down for generations, could have crystallized into the flood myths we know today. The core structure is always the same. A divine decision to send a punishment, a warning to a virtuous individual, the meticulous construction of a survival vessel, the preservation of life, and the final quest for a new beginning, symbolized by the release of a bird to find dry land. Consider the Sumerian version featuring Ziusudra, one of the oldest recorded iterations. The details are all there, a blueprint for a story that would be told and retold across continents for thousands of years. This shared narrative of survival against impossible odds, of a world wiped clean and reborn, created a powerful common ground. When two cultures met and discovered they both told a story of a great flood, it was more than a curiosity. It was a recognition of shared experience, a shared trauma that transcended language and custom. It meant their ancestors had faced the same existential threats and had been chosen, just as they were, for a second chance. What global event of our own era, from pandemics to climate shifts, will be remembered thousands of years from now as the foundational myth of our resilience? While the flood story bound cultures through a shared trauma of the past, another powerful narrative offered hope for the future, one that played out in rituals from the sun-baked temples of Egypt to the lush groves of ancient Greece. In Phoenicia, worshippers wept for the fallen god Adonis. In Mesopotamia, they chanted laments for Tammuz, and along the Nile, priests performed elaborate ceremonies for Osiris, the lord of the underworld who was murdered and miraculously restored to life. These were not separate faiths but local variations of a single, profound archetype, the dying and reviving god. This figure's fate was inextricably tied to the land itself, his death mirroring the barren winter and his resurrection heralding the life-giving return of spring. The pioneering anthropologist Sir James Frazer, in his monumental work The Golden Bough, spent decades tracing this pattern across continents, identifying its core components with startling clarity. The god was almost always a vegetation deity, his body symbolic of the seed that must be buried in the earth to sprout anew. His death was often brutal and unjust, a sacrifice that disrupted the natural order. This was followed by a period of intense mourning and lamentation from his followers, a communal expression of grief for the world's lost fertility. Finally came the joyous celebration of his return, a victory over death that promised renewal and life for all. No story captures this cycle more vividly than the Egyptian myth of Osiris. Betrayed and slain by his brother Set, his body was cut into pieces and scattered across the land. His devoted wife, the goddess Isis, embarked on a heartbreaking quest, gathering each fragment to lovingly reassemble him. Through her magic and unwavering devotion, Osiris was restored, not to his old life, but to a new, eternal existence as the king of the dead. This was more than a tale of love. It was a cosmic metaphor for the flooding and receding of the Nile, the decay and rebirth of crops, and the human hope for life beyond the grave. When people participated in the rituals of these gods, they were not merely watching a play. They were actively ensuring the turn of the seasons, believing their tears and their joy helped coax the god, and therefore the harvest, back into the world. This shared understanding of cyclical renewal created a deep spiritual kinship. A Greek devotee of Dionysus, the god of the vine who was torn apart and reborn, would have intuitively understood the purpose behind an Egyptian's prayers to Osiris. They both acknowledged a world governed by rhythms of loss and recovery. What cycles of ending and beginning do we personally navigate in our own lives, in our relationships, or even in our careers? This universal yearning to overcome mortality through a hero's journey would become the most personal and empowering myth of all. A Hittite diplomat seated across from a Mycenaean lord might have leaned in and spoken of a great hero facing impossible trials. He would not have needed to explain the story's deeper meaning. The Mycenaean, hearing a tale that echoed his own legends of Heracles, would have nodded in immediate understanding. In that moment, a bridge was built not on stone but on story. This is the power of the hero's journey, a narrative blueprint so deeply embedded in the human psyche that it became a silent language of diplomacy. The mythologist Joseph Campbell called this the monomyth, the one great story told 1,000 different ways. He defined a hero as someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. This single idea, the call to a purpose greater than personal survival, resonates across every continent. The structure is always recognizable. It begins with a call to adventure, a disruption of the ordinary world that the hero often initially refuses. Then comes the offer of supernatural aid, a guiding force or mentor that provides the tools for the quest ahead. This leads to the crucial road of trials, a series of ordeals that test the hero's spirit and forge a new identity. Finally, after confronting the ultimate challenge, the hero must return, crossing back into the ordinary world with some elixir, some hard-won wisdom or boon to share with the community. Think of the Mesopotamian king Gilgamesh, his heart broken by the death of his friend Enkidu, setting out on a desperate journey across the waters of death to find the secret of eternal life. Now, leap forward millennia and across the map to the British legends of King Arthur and his knights embarking on their sacred quest for the Holy Grail, a vessel promising healing and divine grace. The specifics of the cultures, the gods, and the monsters are entirely different, yet the underlying architecture of their stories is identical. A profound loss or a call to restore order, a perilous journey into the unknown, and the ultimate search for a prize that represents transcendence itself. When an ancient diplomat recognized this pattern in another culture's lore, it was a powerful signal. It meant they both understood the fundamental human experience of struggle, sacrifice, and the hope for transformation. It framed their interaction not as a meeting between strangers, but as an encounter between fellow travelers on the same epic road. Can you identify the hero's journeys in your own life, those moments when you were called to leave your comfort zone, faced great trials, and returned changed? This shared narrative of striving and growth allowed elites to see each other as participants in the same grand human story. And once that story established a bond of shared values, it created the perfect foundation for the next logical step, the exchange of goods and ideas that would weave the world together. The bustling port of Ugarit hums with a familiar tension. An Egyptian merchant, his linen robes stark against the sun-bleached stone, clasps the calloused hand of a ship captain from Lebanon. Between them lies not just a pile of cedar logs and sacks of grain, but a profound cultural gap. Yet the deal is sealed not merely with a handshake, but with a solemn oath. The Egyptian invokes the protection of Yam, the powerful sea god, while the Phoenician calls upon his own lord of the waves. In that moment, they are not rivals but fellow supplicants before the same unpredictable divine force. This shared reverence for the ocean's power provided a sacred foundation for their economic partnership. transforming a simple transaction into a covenant witnessed by the heavens themselves. Across the ancient world, shared mythological concepts became the bedrock of early commerce. A Hittite trade treaty with a neighboring kingdom makes this explicit, its text calling upon the storm god of Hatti and the sun goddess of Arena to stand as guarantors, stating clearly, "Let the 1,000 gods of the Hittites and the 1,000 gods of Hayaza be present to this oath and to this treaty." This was more than poetic language, it was a binding legal and spiritual framework. When both parties believed in a pantheon that included a deity like the Mesopotamian Nisaba, who presided over the vital domains of writing, accounting, and grain, or the Greek Hermes, the swift-footed patron of merchants, travelers, and contracts, they were agreeing to a mutual code of ethics. To cheat a partner in such a deal was not just a business risk, it was a blasphemous act that invited divine retribution. This shared belief system manifested in concrete ways. Oaths sworn to mutually recognized deities carried immense weight, their power often greater than that of any earthly king's decree. Neutral ground for marketplaces was frequently established on land considered sacred to a god of commerce, creating a perceived zone of fairness and order under divine supervision. The Phoenicians, master mariners of the Mediterranean, were particularly adept at this theological diplomacy. As they established trading posts from Cyprus to Carthage, they encountered the Greeks. The Phoenicians worshipped Melkart, the king of their city of Tyre and a god of colonization. The Greeks, in turn, worshipped Heracles, the ultimate hero of strength and journey. The two cultures saw a reflection of their own deity in the other. Melkart's iconography began to resemble Heracles' lion skin and club. This syncretism, this blending of gods, was a strategic masterstroke. It told every Greek merchant, we may call him by different names, but we honor the same divine principles of enterprise, endurance, and exploration. A deal with a Phoenician became a deal blessed by a figure you already revered. What invisible systems and modern deities do we trust today to facilitate our global economy? From the complex algorithms governing stock markets to the silent agreements that allow digital currencies to hold value. This deep economic interdependence, sanctified by shared myth, created bonds so strong they were often sealed through the most intimate and powerful alliance of all, the joining of royal families through marriage. The marriage contract between Pharaoh Ramses II and the Hittite princess was etched not only on clay tablets but in the very fabric of their joined rituals. As incense smoke curled towards the heavens, Egyptian priests chanted the names of Ammon and Ra, while Hittite emissaries invoked the storm god Teshub. In that sacred space, two pantheons were not in conflict. They were being deliberately woven into a single, divine family to bless the union of two empires. This was the ultimate expression of diplomatic marriage, a practice where the fusion of royal bloodlines was always accompanied by a strategic syncretism of gods. One Amarna letter captures this sentiment perfectly, with a neighboring king writing to the pharaoh, "We are brothers, you and I, and so our gods should be as one." This was not mere flattery, it was a sophisticated political and theological strategy. The process was methodical. Diplomats and priests would first identify a foreign god with a similar domain or set of attributes to a local deity. A goddess of love from one culture would be formally equated with a goddess of love from another. A powerful storm god would be merged with a different but equally potent lord of thunder and justice. This identification created a new, hybrid divine figure that was theologically acceptable to both peoples, a shared celestial patron for the new alliance. Joint temples would be established, and new festivals were created to honor these blended gods, turning abstract theological agreement into vibrant public celebration. No dynasty perfected this art more than the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt. To bridge the gap between their Greek ruling class and the native Egyptian population, they engineered a new god entirely. Serapis was a brilliant synthesis, combining the underworld and fertility aspects of the Egyptian gods Osiris and Apis with the majestic authority of the Greek gods Zeus and Hades. He was depicted with the bearded, mature features of Zeus, but often seated in a pose reminiscent of an Egyptian pharaoh, a visual compromise designed to appeal to everyone. The cult of Serapis provided a common religious ground, a divine figure that a Greek soldier and an Egyptian priest could both worship without feeling they had betrayed their ancestral traditions. It was statecraft through storytelling, creating a shared myth to govern a diverse kingdom. In many ways, this ancient practice finds a quiet echo in modern intercultural marriages, where couples today thoughtfully blend holiday traditions, culinary customs, and family rituals to create a new, unified identity from two distinct heritages. This deliberate, calculated creation of shared divine figures reached its most influential and enduring form with a deity whose worship would eventually span continents. The air in the Serapeum of Alexandria was thick with the scent of foreign incense and the murmur of prayers in two different languages. Beneath the soaring columns of the grandest temple in the city, a Greek merchant in a simple chiton stood beside an Egyptian priest in leopard skin, both offering devotion to the same magnificent statue. This was Serapis, a god who existed nowhere in the old stories of either culture, yet somehow felt familiar to both. He was the ultimate political creation, a deity engineered in a royal think tank by Ptolemy I, a general of Alexander the Great who needed to unify his newly conquered kingdom. His challenge was profound, ruling a land of native Egyptians with a deep, ancient faith and a growing population of Greeks who saw those native gods as strange, animal-headed figures. Ptolemy needed a divine figure who could bridge this chasm, a god for everyone. The historian Plutarch would later record that Ptolemy's advisors deliberately selected the attributes of this new god, crafting him like a masterpiece of propaganda. They took the deep, resonant power of the Egyptian Osiris, the lord of the afterlife and god of fertility who guaranteed the Nile's annual flood and the rebirth of the soul. To this, they fused the overwhelming authority of the Greek king of the gods, Zeus, and the solemn dominion of Hades over the underworld. The resulting deity, Serapis, was a theological marvel. He was a god of kingship, death, fertility, and the heavens all in one. His visual representation was a masterclass in cross-cultural design. He was depicted as a mature, bearded man in the classical Greek style, radiating the serene power of Zeus, but he was often seated on a throne with a grain measure, a symbol of fertility and the underworld, resting on his head or beside him. This iconography was a carefully coded message. To a Greek colonist, he looked like their own father god, a figure of order and power they could immediately respect. To an Egyptian, the grain measure and his role as a lord of the dead and renewal signaled that this was simply a new, acceptable form of their beloved Osiris. This was not an organic merging of faiths over centuries. It was a top-down, state-mandated religious policy designed to create a shared identity. The strategic benefits were immediate and powerful. It gave the Greek ruling class a familiar, dignified patron deity who legitimized their rule within an Egyptian spiritual framework. For the Egyptians, it allowed them to maintain their core beliefs while participating in the new political order, seeing their ancient gods reflected in this official state cult. The policy was so successful that the worship of Serapis did not just remain in Egypt. It spread across the entire Mediterranean, carried by Greek and Roman traders, soldiers, and settlers. his temples becoming centers of a cosmopolitan faith long after the Ptolemaic dynasty had faded into history. It makes you wonder, in our own fragmented, globalized world, what symbol or shared story could possibly be engineered to unite our disparate cultures with the same potent force. The creation of Serapis proved that a shared myth could forge a unified political reality, a lesson that would be applied with even greater urgency when empires faced their ultimate test, the chaos of war. The allied armies of the Hittites and their vassal states stood shoulder to shoulder on the plains of Anatolia, their spears pointing toward a common enemy. As the war drums beat, their priests did not just call for victory, they invoked an ancient story, the primordial defeat of the dragon Ilyanka. This was more than a prayer, it was a declaration that their current battle was a reenactment of the cosmos itself, a sacred duty to crush chaos once again. Across the ancient world, the most potent unifying force was often a shared enemy, and the most powerful enemies were those pulled directly from mythology. Every culture had its chaos monster, a being of pure disorder that the gods had to vanquish to create the world. In Babylon, it was the saltwater dragon Tiamat, slain by the god Marduk in the Enuma Elish. He splits her like a shellfish into two parts, the text declares, using half of her to form the heavens and the other half to create the earth. This was not just a creation story, it was a political blueprint. Babylonian kings explicitly cast themselves as Marduk and their rivals as the monstrous Tiamat, framing their military campaigns as a necessary reordering of the world. Similarly, Egypt had the serpent Apophis, who each night attempted to devour the sun god Ra on his journey through the underworld. Greek myths told of Typhon, a fire-breathing giant so terrifying that the gods themselves fled from him. These figures served a universal psychological purpose. They gave a face and a name to the abstract terrors of famine, drought, and darkness. More importantly, they provided a perfect archetype to project onto a human enemy. The process of dehumanization was systematic and deliberate. State propaganda would describe rival kingdoms in the same terms used for these cosmic monsters, calling them hordes of chaos or forces of non-creation. Their soldiers were not men with families, they were the venom of Apophis given human form. This rhetoric transformed a simple territorial dispute over resources or trade routes into a holy war, a cosmic battle between the forces of order and the forces of oblivion. The entire war effort was sanctified. Before marching into battle, armies would perform rituals reenacting the primordial victory of their god over the chaos monster. By symbolically slaying the serpent or the dragon in a sacred play, they believed they were channeling that divine power, ensuring their real-world victory. This shared mythological language could even force temporary alliances between the bitterest of rivals. When the mysterious sea peoples descended upon the eastern Mediterranean in the 12th century before the Common Era, the crumbling Hittite Empire and the powerful Egyptians, longtime adversaries, found a common cause. The records from both empires describe these invaders in distinctly non-human terms, as warriors from the sea or as chaotic forces upsetting the established order. Faced with an enemy that truly threatened their entire world, they set aside their differences, united by the need to defeat a common chaos monster that threatened to undo civilization itself. What figures or forces do we collectively label as chaos monsters in our modern world, and how does that framing shape our political and social alliances? This powerful tactic of defining a common enemy was masterfully complemented by a more subtle and enduring tool, the deliberate exchange of sacred knowledge. A Greek diplomat would undertake a perilous journey across the Mediterranean, not to deliver a treaty, but to ask a question. His destination was the remote oasis of Siwa, home to the legendary oracle of the Egyptian god Ammon. His king, facing a momentous decision, needed more than local advice. He sought the validation of a foreign seer whose fame for accuracy spanned the known world. This was high-stakes diplomacy, conducted not in the language of law, but in the interpretation of divine will. The Greek historian Herodotus preserves a stunning account of this practice. He writes that the famously wealthy King Croesus of Lydia, before risking his kingdom in war, tested all the great oracles of Greece and Egypt. He sent messengers to ask each one what he, Croesus, was doing at that very moment back in his palace. The oracle at Delphi reportedly answered with perfect precision, describing him cooking a lamb and a turtle in a bronze pot. Convinced of its power, Croesus then entrusted his kingdom's fate to its prophecies. This was not mere superstition. It was a sophisticated form of interstate intelligence gathering and mutual validation. When two powerful cultures acknowledged the prophetic power of the other's seers or diviners, they were agreeing on something profound, a shared way of knowing the future. They were building a common epistemological framework. Whether the medium was the cryptic vapors inhaled by the Pythia at Delphi, the examination of a sheep's liver by a Mesopotamian priest, or the reading of celestial omens by Babylonian astrologers, the underlying principle was the same. The gods communicated their will through signs, and skilled interpreters could decode them. This shared belief transformed oracular centers into neutral ground for international discourse. Ambassadors from warring city-states would stand in line at Delphi, each seeking the god Apollo's counsel, implicitly accepting the same divine authority. The interpretations of these omens themselves became a subject of negotiation. Two rival powers, each claiming a favorable omen from the same celestial event, might send their priests to debate the meaning, forging a temporary peace in the process of deciphering the heavens. Perhaps the most fascinating example of this cross-cultural exchange of prophecy is the case of the Sibylline books. According to Roman legend, in the 6th century before the Common Era, a mysterious old woman from the Near East, a Sibyl, offered to sell the last king of Rome 9 books of prophecies. When he refused her price, she burned 3 and offered the remaining 6 for the same amount. He refused again. She burned 3 more and again demanded the original price for the final 3. Alarmed, the king consulted his priests and finally purchased the surviving books. These foreign prophecies, originally from the Greek world of Asia Minor, were then entrusted to a special college of priests and consulted for centuries during every major crisis in the Roman Republic and Empire. A collection of Eastern mystical texts became the official guide for the most powerful state in the Western world. It makes you wonder, what modern institutions do we treat as our own oracles, placing our faith in their complex models and predictions to guide our economies and our policies? This entire system of shared divination rested on a common understanding of the cosmos, a universe whose very geography was mapped and explained not by science, but by the grand and interconnected stories of myth. The Babylonian astronomer priest traced the familiar shape in the night sky, his finger connecting the dots for his Indus Valley guest. "We call it the Great Bear," he might have said, "but your people see a chariot." The stars themselves were a blank canvas, and every culture painted its own stories upon them. This shared celestial map was more than a collection of myths. It was humanity's first global positioning system and universal clock. By giving names and narratives to the wandering planets and fixed constellations, our ancestors created a common reference point, a cosmic stage where every civilization, no matter how distant, could look up and participate in the same grand drama. A Mesopotamian omen text reveals how deeply this was believed, stating, "When Venus appears in the east, a king will rise and conquer." The movements of the heavens were not random. They were a direct language from the gods, dictating the fate of kings and the fortune of harvests. This shared language of the sky was the key to synchronizing the ancient world. The practical need to predict the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers led Babylonian priests to develop a sophisticated lunar calendar, meticulously tracking the phases of the moon. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the annual, predictable flooding of the Nile aligned more perfectly with the solar cycle, prompting them to adapt the Babylonian model, blending lunar months with a solar year. This was not merely an academic exercise, it was a matter of survival. Knowing when to plant and when to harvest required a calendar that everyone, from the farmer in his field to the king in his palace, agreed upon. This synchronization extended across the globe. Consider the Pleiades, that tiny, glittering cluster of stars. In the Mediterranean, its heliacal rising, its first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility, was the signal for Greek sailors that the treacherous winter seas had calmed and the safe sailing season had begun. At nearly the same time, halfway across the world in Mesoamerica, the very same celestial event told Mayan farmers that the rains were coming and it was time to plant their maize. They had no contact with each other, yet they were reading the same page from the same cosmic instruction manual. This shared cosmic clock reached its most influential form with the zodiac, a Babylonian concept that divided the sky into 12 sections, each named for a constellation. The Greeks later adopted this system, renaming the figures with their own heroes and monsters, from Aries the ram to Leo the lion. This shared framework of celestial houses created a common vocabulary for tracking the sun's annual journey, a system so effective it is still recognized today. Can you see the echo of this ancient cooperation in our own world, where the invisible constellations of global positioning satellites have replaced the stars as our universal guide? This ability to tell the same time from the same sky was what made the next level of alliance possible, allowing distant cultures to not just understand each other, but to act together in perfect, sacred rhythm. The visiting king's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the ritual rattle, its sound meant to drive away the darkness. He was not merely a spectator tonight, he was being asked to play a role in the sacred drama of Osiris' death and resurrection. To share the stage with the high priests of Egypt was an honor beyond any trade treaty or royal marriage, a gesture of profound trust that signaled his acceptance into the very heart of the kingdom's spiritual life. These were not simple plays. The mysteries of Osiris, with their elaborate reenactment of the god's murder by Set, Isis' desperate search for his body, and his ultimate restoration, were believed to be far more than symbolic. The priests understood that by performing these sacred actions with perfect precision, they were not just remembering a story, they were actively regenerating the cosmos itself. Each correct word spoken, each ritual gesture made, was a thread pulled to reweave the fabric of order, ensuring the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and the kingdom would endure for another year. For a foreign leader to be invited into this delicate, cosmic machinery was an act of immense diplomatic weight. His participation was seen as a blessing that would extend to his own nation, linking their fates through a shared sacred action that transcended politics. The stagecraft for these events was breathtakingly complex, requiring months of preparation by specialized priests who were both actors and theologians. The legitimacy of the pharaoh himself was tied to the ritual's success, as he often played the role of Horus, the avenging son who restores rightful order. Centuries later, the Roman Emperor Hadrian recognized this power. He was not content to simply rule Greece, he wanted its soul, so he underwent initiation into the secretive Eleusinian mysteries, a powerful Greek cult centered on the myth of Demeter and Persephone and the promise of life after death. By submitting to their rites, he demonstrated a deep respect for Hellenic culture that won him the loyalty of the Athenian elite far more effectively than any military decree. It makes you wonder what modern, secular rituals hold a similar power to unite across cultures today. Do global events like the Olympic Games, where nations temporarily set aside differences to participate in a shared spectacle of human achievement, serve as our own version of this ancient, unifying performance? The powerful alliances forged in these shared dramas often demanded a permanent, physical expression, one carved not in time but in stone. The sound of chisels on stone echoed from a Jerusalem hillside, a percussive rhythm of collaboration. Phoenician artisans, masters of wood and bronze from the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon, worked alongside Israelite masons, all laboring under a commission from King Solomon. The temple they were building would become the spiritual heart of a nation, yet its very design was a product of international alliance, a physical prayer constructed from shared myth. The biblical Book of Kings describes this monumental project, crediting King Hiram of Tyre for sending not only the famed cedar wood but also a master craftsman, a man of mixed Israelite and Phoenician heritage, to oversee the bronze work. The result was a structure adorned with symbols that spoke a universal language. It featured a great molten sea, a colossal bronze basin resting on the backs of 12 oxen, an image of cosmic waters that would have been instantly familiar to any Canaanite or Mesopotamian. Its inner sanctum was guarded by enormous cherubim, not the chubby babies of later art, but towering, composite creatures with the bodies of lions, the wings of eagles, and the faces of men. These were not uniquely Israelite inventions. They were powerful symbols borrowed from a common Near Eastern artistic vocabulary used to signify the throne of a deity. This was architecture as diplomacy, a permanent fusion of cultural narratives set in stone and metal for all generations to see. An international language of power and divinity was being carved into the very pillars of the temple. The sacred tree of life, a symbol of divine nourishment, appears on ivories from Samaria and walls in Assyria. The winged sun disk, representing the protective gaze of a sun god, adorned Egyptian lintels and Hittite royal seals. The guardian sphinx or lamashu, a colossal winged bull with a human head, stood watch at the gates of palaces from Mesopotamia to the Levant, a universal statement of royal authority and supernatural protection. To incorporate these motifs was to declare participation in a shared cosmological order. Such ambitious projects required more than just a mutual understanding. They demanded the wholesale exchange of materials, labor, and intellectual property. Phoenician ships transported Lebanese cedar, a wood prized for its scent and durability. Quarries in Israel provided the foundational stone, but most importantly, artistic blueprints and theological concepts crossed borders with the artisans. A master carver from Tyre would have brought with him a mental library of canonical forms, the proper proportions for a cherub, the sacred geometry for a temple layout. In adopting and adapting these forms for the temple in Jerusalem, the Israelites were not merely copying, they were engaging in a deep theological dialogue, refining their own understanding of the divine by framing it within a visual language their neighbors would comprehend and respect. This universal architectural impulse reached for the heavens themselves. The great ziggurats of Mesopotamia, massive stepped pyramids like the Etimenanki in Babylon, were literally called the foundation of heaven and earth. They were conceived as stairways for the gods to descend to earth and for priests to ascend closer to the divine. It is a breathtaking thought that this same concept, this human yearning to build a bridge to the cosmos, may have independently inspired the pyramid-building traditions of Egypt and the step temples of the Maya. Though separated by oceans, these cultures all expressed a shared desire to anchor their world to the heavens through monumental stone. What modern project embodies this same fusion of global effort and unifying ideology? The International Space Station, a construct of American, Russian, Japanese, and European modules orbiting high above the Earth, serves as a silent testament to what humanity can build when we pool our knowledge and resources toward a common skyward goal. These stone testaments to alliance were often accompanied by a more portable and equally powerful form of cultural fusion, the written word. The rhythmic scratching of bronze stelae on damp clay tablets filled the warm, dusty air of the Hittite scriptorium. Under the glow of oil lamps, a master scribe hunched over his work, his eyes moving between a worn Babylonian cuneiform tablet and the fresh, pliable clay before him. He was not simply copying, he was performing an act of high diplomacy, translating the great epic of Gilgamesh from the language of a rival empire into his own Hittite tongue for the royal library. The prologue of the epic itself set his mission, inviting the reader to learn the story of the man who knew all things. His task was to make that foreign wisdom not just understandable, but resonant and respectable for his own king and court. These scribes were the unsung agents of cultural fusion, their ink as potent a tool for alliance as any ambassador's silver or soldier's spear. Their training was immense, requiring years to master not only their native Hittite but also the complex Akkadian of Babylon and often the languages of other neighboring powers. They were living repositories of international thought. The political motivation for this painstaking work was profound. A Hittite king possessing the Gilgamesh epic in his own library was making a powerful statement. It demonstrated his worldliness, his command of the intellectual treasures of his rivals, and his sophistication in understanding universal human themes. Translating a text like Gilgamesh was an act of intellectual acquisition, a way to absorb the wisdom and even the perceived magical power of another great civilization. This was not a simple word-for-word substitution. It was a delicate process of adaptation. As the scribe worked, he might subtly alter a detail, perhaps reframing a reference to a Babylonian god to better align with a similar Hittite deity, ensuring the story's themes of kingship, friendship, and the quest for immortality would strike a familiar chord in the heart of his audience. The discovery of fragments of the Gilgamesh epic in the ruins of the Hittite capital Hattusa, and even far to the south in the Canaanite city of Megiddo, stands as silent testimony to the epic's incredible journey. It was not confined to one river valley. It was a shared possession of the ancient Near Eastern world, a story whose power transcended every border. What modern stories hold this same universal power, translated and adapted across countless languages and cultures today, from the pages of novels to the frames of blockbuster films? This systematic dissemination of stories through writing ensured their survival for millennia, but their living power was also carried by a more dynamic and transient group, the itinerant craftsmen who carried entire mythologies in their skilled hands. The master seal cutter from Cyprus carried his entire world in a leather satchel. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were tiny stone cylinders, each one intricately carved with the gods and heroes of his homeland. As he traveled from the Mycenaean halls of Greece to the bustling ports of the Levant, his hands did more than shape amulets and signet rings. They transmitted entire mythologies. These itinerant artisans were the unsung heroes of cultural fusion, their portable art serving as the primary vector for spreading shared stories across vast and disconnected lands. A single cylinder seal from Mesopotamia, rolling its impression of a hero grappling with a lion onto a wet clay tablet in Anatolia, was not just authorizing a trade document. It was implanting a powerful visual narrative into the consciousness of a foreign court, a story that would be seen, discussed, and eventually adapted. This is why archaeologists find Mycenaean pottery styles, with their distinctive octopus and chariot scene motifs, in ancient Canaanite cities. It was not merely the pots that were traded, but the artistic ideas and the myths they illustrated encoded within their very form. These craftsmen were masters of adaptation. A metal worker from the north, skilled in the lost wax technique for casting bronze, might be commissioned by a local chieftain to create a ceremonial cup. He would skillfully blend the story of a storm god from his own tradition with the iconography of the local weather deity, creating a new, hybrid artwork that honored the patron's beliefs while showcasing the artist's foreign expertise. This process of creative synthesis is visible in the recurring figure known as the Master of Animals, a powerful being shown grasping two fierce beasts. This exact same motif appears in the art of ancient India, holding tigers, and in the art of archaic Greece, holding lions. Though separated by thousands of miles, the core idea of a heroic figure taming the chaotic forces of nature was being expressed through an identical visual language carried by the hands of traveling artists. The Philistines provide a stunning example of this migration. When they settled on the coast of Canaan, they brought with them not just their Aegean lineage but their entire artistic culture. Their pottery abruptly shifted from local Canaanite styles to feature distinctly Mycenaean designs, suggesting that the potters themselves had migrated, bringing their mythic iconography with them and planting it firmly in new soil. Who are the modern equivalents of these ancient craftsmen? Consider the global teams of software developers, whose apps and digital platforms create a universal visual and narrative experience across every culture. Or the film directors whose cinematic stories, filled with archetypal heroes and villains, are exported to every corner of the globe, subtly blending local sensibilities with Hollywood's mythic grammar. The physical artifacts these ancient travelers left behind are the crucial evidence of their journey, and we now have powerful new tools to read their stories. A tiny fleck of pigment from a Minoan vase no larger than a grain of sand rests under the intense gaze of a spectrometer. The machine hums and the data appears on a screen, revealing a chemical signature that should not exist here on Crete. The vibrant blue is not from a local source. Its precise mineral composition matches the paints used in the royal workshops of Egypt, and on that very same pot, painted beside the strange blue, is the figure of a griffin, a mythical beast that was simultaneously appearing on palace walls along the Nile. This is not a coincidence, it is a conversation captured in clay. For decades, the fusion of ancient myths was a compelling theory built on texts and similarities. Now, archaeology provides the tangible proof, turning speculation into documented fact. As one prominent archaeologist put it, every artifact is a frozen moment of cultural interaction. We can trace these mythic conversations through specific classes of objects that moved along trade routes. Intricate cylinder seals, small enough to be worn around the neck, were rolled across clay documents, leaving impressions of gods and heroes that acted as both a signature and a carrier of sacred imagery. A Mesopotamian seal depicting Gilgamesh could authorize a trade deal in Anatolia, planting that heroic story in a new land. Exquisite ivory carvings, often depicting goddesses or sphinxes, have been found far from their point of origin, their styles blending so completely that it is impossible to say whether the artist was Syrian or Cypriot. Even weaponry was a canvas for myth, with ceremonial axes and daggers featuring scenes of lion hunts or the slaying of chaos monsters, a universal language of power and divine favor. Standardized weights used in marketplaces, essential for fair trade, were often cast in the shape of turtles or ducks, animals sacred to gods of commerce, implying that a deal was not just between people, but was underwritten by a shared divine authority. The ultimate time capsule of this interconnected world is the Uluburun shipwreck, a Bronze Age vessel that sank off the coast of Turkey over 3,000 years ago. Its hull was a floating museum of the ancient Mediterranean. It carried 10 tons of Cypriot copper, African ebony, Baltic amber, and Canaanite jars filled with olives and resin. But more telling than the raw materials were the personal items, the cargo of culture. There were cylinder seals from Mesopotamia and Egypt, a stone scepter with cultic significance, a golden scarab bearing the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, and finely crafted Mycenaean swords. This was not a ship from one nation. It was a cosmopolitan crew carrying a fusion of goods and the mythic symbols stamped upon them, a microcosm of a world already profoundly globalized. When future archaeologists sift through the layers of our own era, what artifacts will they point to as evidence of our global fusion? Will it be the universal smartphone, its internal architecture a collaboration of American design, Asian manufacturing, and African mineral wealth, all governed by icons understood in every language? The physical evidence pulled from the earth and the seabed forces a profound shift in perspective. It challenges the very idea of a purely independent culture, revealing that from our deepest past, we have always been part of a single, interwoven story. There is no such thing as a purely Egyptian myth or a purely Greek god. The very idea of a culture developing in total isolation is a modern fiction, a story we tell ourselves to create neat, separate boxes for a past that was gloriously messy and interconnected. Ancient cultural identity was not a fortress to be defended, but a river constantly fed by new streams of influence, adaptation, and exchange. Archaeologists have a powerful term for this phenomenon. They call it entanglement, a word that perfectly captures the complex, inseparable interweaving of cultural practices and beliefs across supposed boundaries. As one modern historian of the Near East puts it, the quest for cultural origins is a modern obsession. Ancient people were more concerned with cultural efficacy. They asked not, is this story purely ours, but does this god work? Does this ritual bring rain? Does this alliance make us stronger? Look at the Greek pantheon, which we often see as the bedrock of Western civilization. It is itself a magnificent fusion, a layered tapestry woven from threads of Indo-European warrior gods, the ancient, nature-based deities of the Minoan civilization, and profound influences from the mythologies of Egypt and the Near East. The goddess Aphrodite, for instance, did not simply spring from the sea foam in the Greek imagination. She is a direct adaptation of the Phoenician goddess Astarte, who was herself linked to the Mesopotamian Ishtar, a powerful deity of love and war whose worship traveled the maritime trade routes into Greek ports. The Greeks did not just copy her, they renamed her and wove her into their own existing stories, but her core essence and power were imported. This same process of renaming and syncretism was a standard diplomatic tool. The Romans, seeking to position their young republic within the respected cultural sphere of the Hellenistic world, systematically mapped their own gods onto the Greek pantheon. Their Jupiter became synonymous with Zeus, their Juno with Hera, and their Minerva with Athena. This was not an admission of inferiority, it was a strategic move. By claiming they worshipped the same gods under different names, the Romans could engage with Greek colonies in southern Italy and across the Mediterranean as cultural relatives, easing the path for trade, treaties, and ultimately conquest. They even rewrote their own origin story, linking their founding to the Trojan hero Aeneas, thus embedding themselves directly into the epic cycle of Homer, the most respected literary tradition of the age. Foreign festivals were adopted and repurposed, their exotic origins forgotten or glorified as ancient tradition. Can you see the echoes of this in your own life? Your personal identity is likely a fusion of the places your family came from, the media you consume, the friends who influenced you, and the subcultures you have passed through. You are a living testament to entanglement. This relentless deconstruction of cultural boundaries was never just a philosophical exercise. It had direct and powerful geopolitical consequences, shaping the destinies of empires. The silver tablet gleamed under the sun, its surface inscribed with words that would end decades of brutal warfare. In the 13th century before the Common Era, the Hittite and Egyptian empires did not just sign a ceasefire, they forged the world's first recorded peace treaty, the Treaty of Kadesh. But this was not merely a political document, it was a spiritual covenant. The treaty explicitly called upon the 1,000 gods of the Hittites and the 1,000 gods of the Egyptians as witnesses, a breathtaking invocation that wove two entire pantheons into a single, supernatural enforcement mechanism. The text reads, "As for the words of the treaty which are upon this silver tablet, the 1,000 gods of the Hittites and the 1,000 gods of the Egyptians are with me as witnesses." This was not poetic flourish, it was a binding geopolitical strategy. By naming each other's deities, they acknowledged the full spiritual authority of their rivals' belief system. To break the treaty was not just to betray a human opponent, it was to defy 1,000 divine powers who would unleash their collective wrath. This created a deterrent far more terrifying than any human army, a threat of cosmic consequences that crossed all cultural lines. It also fostered a profound sense of shared identity, framing the two empires not as mortal enemies but as partners existing under a common, divine order that transcended their borders. This model of mythically backed alliance was replicated across the ancient world. Centuries later, the Delian League in Greece united numerous city-states in a mutual defense pact against the Persian Empire. While a military and economic coalition, its cohesion was strengthened by the shared Panhellenic myths that all members acknowledged. Their collective reverence for oracles like Delphi and for heroes like Heracles provided a cultural fabric that made their political and military cooperation possible. They were not just allies, they were spiritual kinsmen. What shared story, what common value, serves as the binding oath for a modern alliance like NATO, where the consequences of betrayal are framed not in divine wrath, but in global security and democratic ideals? The intricate weaving of these mythic and political threads was not an automatic process. It required a specific, highly skilled class of individuals who could speak the language of both gods and kings. His education began not with treaties but with the liver of a sheep. For years, this Mesopotamian diplomat priest learned to read the will of the gods in the subtle lobes and markings of a sacrificed animal's organ, a map of the future inscribed in flesh. He was a master of two worlds, a high priest of the god Enlil, who also served as his king's chief advisor on foreign affairs. His spiritual authority gave his political counsel an unshakable weight, for he did not merely predict the outcomes of alliances, he claimed to channel the divine preferences that shaped them. When he traveled to a foreign court, he was not just an ambassador, he was a mediator between entire pantheons, a walking bridge between the human and the divine. His training was immense and esoteric. He memorized the complex genealogies of gods, learning how the storm god of one culture mirrored the mountain god of another. He mastered the intricate rituals needed to appease deities and the art of interpreting celestial omens, from eclipses to the flight patterns of birds. This knowledge was not abstract theology, it was a practical toolkit for statecraft. He knew that a successful treaty required more than favorable terms. It needed to be framed in a spiritual language that both kingdoms would accept as binding. The Amarna letters, a cache of diplomatic correspondence from the 14th century before the Common Era, reveal this worldview in action. Kings addressed each other as brother, and their discussions of mutual well-being were consistently phrased in terms of divine favor. One letter from the king of Mitanni to the pharaoh of Egypt reads, "May the gods grant you joy, and may your household and your land be well." This was not mere politeness, it was a recognition that the health of a kingdom and the happiness of its gods were one and the same. The diplomat priest was the engineer of this divine political link. His most critical task was composing treaties that correctly invoked the deities of both nations. A misplaced epithet or a forgotten god could render the entire agreement spiritually void in the eyes of one party, dooming it to failure. He would carefully list the 1,000 gods of the Hittites alongside the 1,000 gods of Egypt, as in the Treaty of Kadesh, ensuring each divine witness was properly acknowledged and their potential wrath invoked as the ultimate deterrent against betrayal. He also functioned as a cultural interpreter, deciphering the mythic subtext behind a rival king's demands or understanding how a shared story, like the flood myth, could be leveraged to build instant rapport. Legends of figures like Ahakar, the incredibly wise vizier in the Assyrian court, spread throughout the ancient world precisely because they embodied this ideal. Ahakar was renowned not just for his political cunning, but for his proverbs and fables, his ability to use universal stories to guide his king and outmaneuver foreign adversaries. His wisdom was a fusion of practical statecraft and deep, cross-cultural understanding. So we must ask, who fills the role of the diplomat priest in our modern world of international relations? It is not a single person, but a collective function. It is the cultural attaché who understands the unspoken social codes of a foreign power, the intelligence analyst who deciphers the ideological narratives driving a rival state, and the negotiator who can frame an agreement in a way that resonates with the deepest values of all parties involved. The tools have changed from sheep livers to satellite imagery, but the fundamental need to bridge worlds through a shared language of meaning remains as urgent as ever. Two nations sit across a vast digital table, their screens filled with tariffs and trade deficits. The conversation is stuck, a loop of accusations and demands. Then one diplomat shifts the frame. He speaks not of market share, but of a shared vulnerability, the rising sea levels that threaten both of their coastlines. In that moment, a modern trade dispute taps into an ancient power, the same force that once turned rivals into allies through the story of a great flood. The strategy our ancestors used to forge alliances holds a profound lesson for our globally connected, yet deeply fractured, world. As one contemporary conflict resolution expert puts it, the most durable peace is built on a foundation of shared meaning. We no longer share gods named Teshub or Ra, but we are surrounded by modern myths, powerful narratives that can serve the same unifying purpose. These are our shared values, our common historical experiences like world wars or pandemics, and our universal aspirations for a stable climate and a better future for our children. The application for modern leaders, from diplomats to corporate executives, is a conscious three-step process. It begins with active listening, not just for negotiating positions, but for the core stories a culture tells about itself, its heroes, its traumas, and its destiny. The next step is to find points of symbolic convergence, identifying where your story and theirs share a common theme, whether it is a reverence for education, a collective memory of overcoming adversity, or a mutual commitment to scientific progress. The final, most powerful step is to move beyond talk and create new, collaborative projects that physically manifest a shared story. Consider international scientific collaborations like the CERN particle accelerator, a massive underground ring where nations that were once at war now work side by side. It functions as a modern temple, a place where humanity unites in a sacred quest not for divine favor, but for fundamental knowledge about the universe. It is a shared myth in action, proving that our collective curiosity can be a more powerful bond than our old divisions. What shared global myth are we creating right now with the sprawling digital universe of the Internet, or with our renewed push to become a multi-planetary species? These are not just technological endeavors, they are the foundational stories of our future, telling a tale of a connected humanity reaching for the stars. Yet, to wield this ancient art responsibly, we must also acknowledge its potential for manipulation, for a shared story can be used to exclude as easily as it includes. The scent of burning cedar and the metallic tang of blood hung over the village square, a newly erected statue of a foreign god, its features alien and cold, stood defaced, its stone eyes scratched out by hands that refused to see their own deities in its form. This was the other side of the coin, the violent rejection of a shared story when it was delivered at the point of a spear. For all its power to build bridges, the fusion of legends was not always a peaceful or voluntary process. It could be a brutal tool of coercion, a form of cultural imperialism that sparked ferocious backlash. As one post-colonial scholar starkly puts it, cultural appropriation is not about sharing. It is an act of power, a way of saying your stories belong to me now. The history of these ancient alliances is therefore a complex tapestry, woven with threads of both cooperation and fierce resistance. Consider the explosive failure of the Seleucid king Antiochus IV. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, he sought to forcibly unify his diverse empire by outlawing Jewish religious practices, desecrating the temple in Jerusalem, and erecting an altar to the Greek god Zeus within its most sacred precinct. This was not an invitation to syncretism, it was a deliberate act of cultural annihilation, an attempt to erase a people's identity by overwriting their core narrative with his own. The response was not negotiation, but the Maccabean revolt, a bloody guerrilla war fought not for land, but for the soul of a story. This case reveals a fundamental truth. For mythic fusion to work, it requires a bedrock of mutual respect and perceived benefit. When it is imposed from a position of overwhelming power, it is not seen as an honor, but as an insult, a stripping away of the original cultural context and meaning that gave the story its life-giving power. The legacy of the Roman Interpretatio Romana, the practice of equating foreign gods with their own, is a perfect study in these contrasting outcomes. In Gaul or Britain, a local tribe might accept the identification of their war god with Mars, viewing it as a validation of their own beliefs within the powerful Roman framework. But for the Jews, whose god was uniquely singular and transcendent, any such equation was blasphemous, an impossible compression of their entire world view into a foreign mold they could not and would not accept. The story remains the same, but its meaning is entirely transformed by the power dynamic behind its telling. So we must ask, where do we see similar impositions and resistances in our own global culture? When a multinational corporation trademarks a sacred indigenous symbol for a clothing line, or when a dominant culture repackages the artistic styles of a minority as a passing trend, are we witnessing a new form of forced syncretism? These modern clashes remind us that the stories we share are not neutral. They are deeply entangled with identity, power, and the fundamental human right to narrate one's own existence. The great religions that guide billions today stand as living monuments to this ancient art of mythic fusion. A theologian of comparative religion offers a perfect image for this, stating that religions are not islands, they are continents that were once connected. These vast, complex systems are themselves the most successful and enduring products of that same process of cross-cultural storytelling we have traced through diplomacy and trade. The echoes are unmistakable. The Quran recounts the story of Noah and his ark, a narrative that resonates deeply with the flood myths of Mesopotamia. The Christian story of Jesus, a divine figure who dies and is resurrected, powerfully recalls the archetype of the dying and reviving God found in the cults of Osiris and Adonis. And the life of the Buddha follows the classic hero's journey, leaving his palace and royal life to face trials and achieve ultimate enlightenment before returning with a teaching for all humanity. These are not accusations of copying, but evidence of a shared human vocabulary for exploring the deepest questions. One of the most profound examples of this theological cross-pollination is the influence of Zoroastrianism on the Abrahamic faiths. When the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon, they encountered the sophisticated dualistic cosmology of the Persians, whose prophet Zoroaster had preached of a single wise lord, Ahura Mazda, locked in a cosmic struggle with the destructive spirit, Angra Mainyu. This tradition featured a clear concept of a final judgment, where each soul would be judged at a bridge, with the righteous ascending to a heavenly paradise and the wicked falling into a cold, dark hell. It introduced a savior figure, the Saoshyant, who would one day lead humanity in a final renovation of the world. After their return from exile, Jewish theology transformed, absorbing and adapting these very ideas. The previously vague Jewish underworld of Sheol sharpened into the clearly defined concepts of heaven and Gehenna. The idea of a final resurrection of the dead and a day of judgment entered mainstream thought. These Zoroastrian-infused ideas then flowed directly into the bedrock of Christianity and Islam, shaping their core understandings of the afterlife, divine justice, and the end of days. This process of refinement is also visible in the very figure of the Buddha. His story did not emerge from a vacuum. He was part of a long tradition in India of the Shramana, the world renouncer, a heroic archetype who abandoned society and family to seek ultimate truth through extreme asceticism and meditation. The Buddha's genius was not in inventing the quest, but in refining its path, taking this established archetype and forging from it a revolutionary middle way between indulgence and severe self-denial. Even our modern calendars are marked by this fusion. The Christian celebration of Christmas on December 25th was a deliberate and strategic alignment with far older pagan traditions. This date was already sacred in the Roman Empire as the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, which itself celebrated the winter solstice and the gradual return of the sun's light. By placing the birth of the Son of God on this day, early church leaders provided a familiar and joyous seasonal framework for a new faith, seamlessly weaving a Christian narrative into the ancient, universal rhythm of solar rebirth. So what would happen if we embraced this long-term perspective in our own time? If we truly understood that the walls between our faiths are more like fences built on common ground, could that knowledge become a powerful tool for interfaith dialogue? Recognizing that our most sacred stories have always been in conversation with others does not diminish their power. Instead, it reveals a shared human journey, a collective striving for meaning that has been connecting us for thousands of years. This fusion of legends was never a one-time event. It is an ongoing, dynamic process, and the stories that unite humanity are still being written today. A young author in Tokyo uploads her final draft, a story where Shinto kami converse with Norse valkyries over steaming cups of green tea. Within months, this novel is translated into 30 languages, its digital pages weaving a new kind of sacred tapestry for a global audience. The digital age has fundamentally transformed the ancient process of mythic fusion, accelerating it to a dizzying, real-time pace. Our global network is no longer a caravan route measured in months, but a nervous system firing stories across the planet in seconds. A media studies professor recently observed that cinematic universes like Marvel are not just entertainment, they are the industrialized myth-making of our era, drawing from a global pool of archetypes to assemble gods and heroes that feel familiar to viewers in Seoul, Sao Paulo, and Sydney. The internet itself is the ultimate hyper-efficient itinerant craftsman, a digital seal cutter whose satchel contains every legend, every deity, and every folktale ever recorded. It disseminates and remixes these narratives with an ease our ancient ancestors could never have conceived. This creates breathtaking new forms of cultural hybridity, where a digital artist in Nigeria can design a character inspired by both Yoruba Orisha and Japanese anime aesthetics, creating a new visual language that resonates worldwide. Yet this unprecedented access brings profound new challenges. The same platform that allows for creative fusion can also facilitate a shallow cultural appropriation, where sacred symbols are stripped of their original context and sold as fashion trends or video game power-ups. We see this tension vividly in the modern phenomenon of neo-paganism, where practitioners consciously and thoughtfully construct personal spiritualities by blending ancient Celtic druidry, Norse rune magic, and Eastern meditative practices. This is a deliberate, self-aware form of syncretism, but it raises complex questions about authenticity and the right to adopt traditions that are not one's own by birth. As we watch these new mythologies coalesce before our eyes, we must ask, what new, globally recognized myths are being born from our shared digital experience? Is the story of the internet itself a chaotic digital realm promising both connection and misinformation, our modern epic of order versus chaos? Are the tales of hackers and digital privacy our new hero journeys into unseen worlds? From ancient stone tablets to glowing digital screens, the human impulse to fuse our stories continues, weaving the next chapter of our collective imagination. From the universal trauma of the Great Flood to the hopeful cycle of the dying god and the transformative trials of the hero, these shared narratives provided a common language that allowed strangers to see their own humanity reflected in one another. This recognition that their deepest fears and highest aspirations were the same forged alliances more binding than any treaty written on clay or silver. The story itself was the true technology, a tool for connection far more powerful than any weapon or wall. As the mythologist Karen Armstrong once reflected, myth is not about telling us how to escape our world, but how to live more intensely within it. These ancient tales gave people the framework to understand their place in the cosmos, to cooperate with their neighbors, and to build civilizations that could endure for millennia. This legacy of shared narrative is all around us still. Look for the shared myths in your own life, the stories that bind your family together, the founding ethos of your company, or the national ideals that unite your country. These are the modern vessels carrying our collective values and our shared hopes. We would love to hear from you. Share in the comments one myth or story from your own culture that you have discovered has a surprising parallel in another part of the world. And if you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries that connect us all, please subscribe for more.